Welcome back to the making of Bird Game. I've been working on this game for a few months now, and in that time, I've made a lot of progress on the game's core mechanics, namely the movement and combat systems. But there is still something missing. So far, there's not much of a gameplay loop. I do have a few good mechanics, but not much is tying them together. But today, we're gonna fix that. As I mentioned in a previous devlog, our main character is a phoenix, and one of the things that will be present in my game is the continuity of player deaths. And what that means is when a player dies, that life actually happened. It won't be like a lot of other games where you have to redo an encounter because that's not what's supposed to happen. Mario doesn't get soloed by the first Goomba. You, the player, will eventually get the story right by jumping over it and saving the princess. My game isn't going to be like that. I think Hades is a great example of what I'm talking about. In Hades, when you die, you canonically respawn back in the underworld, and the game acknowledges the fact that you made an attempt to escape. Similarly, in my game there will be artifacts of each previous attempt. When phoenixes die, they turn into ashes, so I figured when you die in-game, ashes can drop to show where you died. And then maybe if you revisit the same area, you could collect the ashes, maybe use them as currency, or it could function as a fast travel / respawn mechanic. The phoenix could rise from the ashes of a previous death, and I think that idea is really cool. Unfortunately, implementation is a bit more complicated than I expected. Because if you think about it, if you let the player respawn from where they died, then what's the actual consequence of losing? There have to be some limits. And this is the part where I reveal that Bird Game is going to have some roguelite elements. And without giving away too much of the lore, the goal of Bird Game is going to be for the bird to reach the sky, and you'll have to restart again from the bottom if you fail a run. The number of times you can respawn from where you died will be limited per run, much like how other roguelites have an item or an unlockable that allow you to cheat death. But I still hesitate to call my game a roguelite, because there are a lot of elements to those games that I don't plan on adding, at least right now. I don't know if I'm going to add randomized terrain, randomized items, and stuff like that, but I do like the structure of beating an area, fighting a boss, and then moving on. So in order to add the respawn mechanic to my game, I created a death state for the player, and after playing an animation, a placeholder object takes the place of the player, and a respawn menu pops up, which gives you the option to either respawn where you last died, or restart from the beginning. Eventually, I'll make it more clear that restarting from the beginning cancels out the run, but for now I'm just looking for functionality and seeing if I can get it to work. The placeholder object is used to save the position of the previous death, and if it's not used, the respawn will crumble and leave behind some permanent debris. Right now the respawn options are represented by buttons, but eventually I hope to turn this into a map and the ashes show up where you died on the map. And after selecting the respawn option, the player is teleported to the respawn location and then replaces the placeholder object, and then after about a second, the bird peeks out of the ashes, and you're invincible until you actually move to get up. This way you'll have a chance of avoiding what killed you in the first place, though if you die in front of a chompy, you're gonna get hit as soon as you come out. I could add some invincibility, but I'm going to have you respawn at full health, so if you get hit once or twice, it's alright. It still needs some fine tuning, but ultimately I'm happy that it just works. The next thing I wanted to do was add a little bit more to the background, because thus far it's been a solid color and very boring. As always, I went to look for some references. The game Skull the Hero Slayer has a very similar style as to what I'm trying to emulate, but that's the first place that I looked, and I'm specifically looking at the background. The first thing I notice is that the background tiles, or the ones that you're not meant to interact with, have significantly less detail than the ones that you are. And the things in the background that do have detail, like the trees, they're more blue and seem much further away, so you don't get confused. I also notice that the background is very different on levels that you move horizontally than the ones that you move vertically. The ones that are horizontal sometimes have these like big long trees that go up into the distance, but when you move vertically, they don't really have that. They're just a bunch of little things that kind of guide you onto where you're supposed to go. That's definitely something I want to make note of, but for now I just need to get a simple tile set to start adding some depth to the background. Instead of starting from scratch, I altered my existing grass tile set to have far less detail and a different color scheme. I expect the background art especially to be a work in progress for a while. It's probably what I'm worst at. So this is the part that I'm most likely to outsource if I end up finishing this game, so I don't want to spend too much time working on it if I don't have to. That said, I also made another version of this tile set that is made of ashes, and I'll use this a lot in the main environment. It will be different from the ashes that you see when you die. These ashes could have been from a long time ago, from before the player even got there. So that's the plan with the environment art. But I also forgot to mention that while I was making these assets and swapping them out, I accidentally broke my original textures. To be fair, I think we needed a new map anyways, so I remade the entire starting level to act a little bit more like a tutorial. I also added these vines that'll disappear when you attack them, so you're forced to actually learn what your buttons do before you can move on. After doing all that, I decided to add functionality to the enemy that we made in the last video. In case you didn't see it, I made animations for this enemy in A-Sprite, but I didn't add it to the game yet. This enemy will sleep until the player gets close. If the player enters its range, it will wake up and go into a patrolling state, where it moves back and forth, and when the player gets even closer, the shrub will ready an attack. After a short windup, it will jump towards the player with its mouth open, and if the player makes contact with it while its mouth is open, it will give the bird a chomp. It's definitely more formidable than the chompy, but it's slow and easy enough to avoid, so it doesn't really pose that much of a threat. But again, this is level 1, so nothing should be too dangerous. And after I worked out a few bugs, we eventually had our second official enemy. The last thing I made was a little pause menu. I already had a lot of the code from the respawn menu, so I decided to just port it over here. No settings yet, but this is where they will be, and I can pause the game, which is great. And that's all I had for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!